Hello, and welcome to a video outlining how to use the emissions hotspot calculator. My name is Jack, and I work for a company called 3Keel, who are a sustainability consultancy who collaborated with FWD and SWA to make this tool. So when you first open the tool, it opens on the user guide tab, which looks like this. This explains a little bit about the tool, how to fill it in, and a bit about the output charts and the information that it provides. So one thing to note is that the information that you put into this tool won't be shared with anyone unless you choose to. It will stay local to this Excel. Okay, moving to the inputs tab. So we can see that the key inputs which are required are highlighted in orange and can be found on the left. And the optional advanced inputs are highlighted in light blue and can be found on the right. And you can also see these input quality progress bars. So these are red when you haven't filled enough for section in, yellow when you filled in all the key inputs, and they turn green when you've filled in some advanced inputs. Okay, so let's work through an example. So first up, we have name and revenue. So I'm just going to make up an imaginary wholesale company. So let's call it Jack's Snacks. And let's say it has an annual revenue of £1 million. Okay, so next up we have logistics. So this way you input your data on your company vehicles. So for key inputs, you can choose the unit, and you can choose between miles, kilometers, or pounds spent on fuel for each different vehicle type. And you also need to choose a reporting period for your data. So this can be annual, quarterly, or monthly. So I'm going to pick annual. And if I had advanced information, I could fill in the total liters of fuel used. So this is separated into diesel and petrol for LGVs and company cars, but it's just diesel for HGVs. And also one thing to note is if, for example, you didn't use any petrol in your LGVs, it's important that you fill in the empty cell with 0 rather than just leave it blank. Okay, so let's say I have 10,000 miles on my HGVs per year. My LGVs do 2,000 miles, and my company cars also do 2,000 miles. Okay, great. So this box is now turned yellow because all key inputs have been filled in. So moving on to buildings and electricity. So ideally, these would be, you'd fill it in for all of your buildings. So that includes your offices, but it can just be for your warehouse or warehouses. So for the key inputs, there are no choice of units this time. You can only fill in how much you spent on gas, oil, and electricity. And then you also need to put whether you have a renewable electricity tariff. That's just a yes or a no. And then for the advanced inputs, the units are in kilowatt hours, which you should be able to find on your electricity bill. And for both of these, you need to fill in the reporting period. Ooh, left that over, sorry. So for both of these, you need to fill in the reporting period. So most bills monthly, ideally this would be annually to average out any sort of hot or cold variation. But let's just say I have a monthly electricity bill with the amount of kilowatt hours of gas that I've used. So I've used 1,000 kilowatt hours of gas. I don't have any oil, and I use 3,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. And 100% of that electricity comes from renewable tariffs. Okay, so that's now the input quality has turned green because I filled in all the advanced inputs. So moving on to refrigerants. So if you have no refrigerated or chilled space, please just type 0 here, and then also, excuse me, pick an example unit. It doesn't matter which one you pick if you have no space. Otherwise, if you do have refrigerated or chilled space, please put in however much you have. So let's say I have 500 meters squared of chilled or refrigerated space. Now, if you know exactly what refrigerants you have and how much they've been topped up recently, you could fill in the advanced section. So for the top 5 refrigerants that you've topped up, you can put in the weight here, what the reporting period is, so whether it's year, quarter, or month. And then you also have to choose a refrigerant here from the drop down. So note that there's quite a lot, so you can scroll on this to try and find the one you need, and they are in alphabetical order as well. Okay, and finally onto value chain. So here you can input the number of employees that you have to estimate commuting emissions, or if you've calculated these already, you can directly input the tons of CO2 equivalent figure right here. And then for annual business travel, you can either input spend, so that's how much you've spent in pounds on business travel, or if you know the mileage of business travel that you've done, you can also input that. So let's say I have 5 full-time employees and I spent £500 on business travel last year. Okay, so when you think you've filled in all your inputs, just double check that all of the input quality bars are either green or yellow, which they look like they are here. So now we can move on to have a look at some outputs. So firstly, just having a look at the brief summary. So this is meant to be a sort of one-page summary of your estimated annual emissions. So the pie chart on the left shows you how much different categories contribute to your annual emissions. So we can see value chain makes up most of Jack Snack's annual emissions, followed by logistics, and then it looks like refrigerants as well. So the unit we're using here, this TCO2e, is tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and there's a little sentence about that just below there. And then on the right, there's a bar chart, which is a comparison of the logistics, buildings, electricity, and refrigerants emissions between your inputs and the sector average. So just note that the sector average is based on the survey results. So there won't be a one-size-fits-all wholesale emissions profile, but it's just meant as an indication as to how you're doing compared to others in the sector. Okay, so moving on to the detailed summary tab. So this takes the top 3 categories from your annual emissions and splits them out into small subcategories. And then for each of the 3 largest subcategories, on the right, there's a suggestion of some of the actions that you can take to reduce your emissions in that subcategory area, as well as where to look in the net zero roadmap for some more information. So if you scroll down, you should see the 3rd one there as well. And then over here, we have an estimate, your annual emissions estimate, but split into greenhouse gas protocol category. Don't worry if that doesn't mean anything for you. That's just if people want to look at their emissions just split into slightly different categorizations. And then finally, in the methodology tab, again, not required reading. It's just if you want a little bit more information about how each of the emissions have been calculated. Okay, so thank you very much for watching, and I hope you find the tool very useful.